You're listening to the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Wildcard Dynasty Show. I'll be a host this week. Matt, you can follow me on Twitter at MattFFDynasty. Now, sadly, we've got no Ali, but never fear, we've got a great guest coming on to replace Ali this week, seeing as he's not here. But we've also got my amazing co-host, Kev, who I'm sure is feeling a little bit nervous going into next weekend. But Kev at Dynasty_Go, how are you doing?
Good evening, gents. Yeah, I'm in a really good place. Obviously, it's a bit of a strange one with a week off between sort of the championship games and the Super Bowl, but plenty to look forward to for me as an Eagles fan. So yeah, just taking it all in, listening to the public views on who's going to win, etc. And next week there's going to be a winner and a loser, and maybe that's a little hint to what we're talking about tonight with our amazing guest. How are you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks, Kev. Like you mentioned, just looking forward to the big one next week. And it's nice, I suppose, that we get an extra week of build-up, don't we, with the Pro Bowl in between. So it's good that we can build up the atmosphere ready for the Super Bowl. But as I mentioned, we've got no Ali this week, but we do have a fantastic guest joining us this week. He's a writer over at DLF, fundraiser for the Scottish Bowl, and he is a man in the streets, but a freak in the spreadsheets. We give a warm wildcard return to Dave Wright, who you can follow on Twitter at FF_Spaceman. Dave, welcome back.
You know, I'm a little speechless because I always listen to you guys on a podcast format. So I actually get to watch your intro on YouTube as we're going in, and I get to see all these beautiful faces go across my screen and caricatures. I can't even focus, guys. I'm going to need a couple minutes here to recover. But in all seriousness, though, I'm really pumped to be here. This is one of my favorite pods to do. I think this is my third year that I've been hanging out with you guys, and it's I really look forward to it. I start getting nervous come like October because you guys are so ahead of schedule. I'm like, am I going to get that invite for the off season? I don't know. But it's here. I'm excited. Now I just don't want it to go by too fast.
There's always an invite, Dave. It's an open invitation when it comes to you coming on the show. We mentioned it last week when we had Anthony Carenti on. You and Anthony, you guys that we have to have on every year. Everybody loves listening to you. The listeners, we enjoy having you on. It was always going to happen this season, Dave. So don't worry about that. But like I've mentioned, we've got a great show coming up where we're going to look at Dynasty value winners and losers from the 2022 season, and then looking at the future outlook in terms of Dynasty for these assets. So we're going straight in, Dave, kicking off with the Dynasty value winners. Who have you got up first?
Yeah, so this first one was Travis Etienne. He was actually my wild card selection last year, which ended up finishing as the 7th most. So I'm pretty proud that I represented after falling on my face the first year with Cortland Sutton. So happy to rebound with some Travis Etienne action as a dynasty value winner. And I think probably people, if they normally listen to me, they'd be expecting me to come in here with a bunch of stats about like how great Travis Etienne was, talking about his volume and all kinds of advanced metrics to measure that. But you know what? If you want to do that, you guys can go to my Patreon. It's free. It's pinned to my Twitter or my Patreon. All the stats are there for Travis Etienne. I'm not going to bore you guys. So I think we all just experienced a fantasy season. We know what he did. But what I want to try to focus on tonight when we're talking about value winners and losers, I want to talk about what was being thought about this time last year, or maybe in the early parts of the offseason last year, and how we can take action and how we can essentially add value to your dynasty teams. Because in my opinion, from January till May, and then September and October, those are some of the most important times in the dynasty season where you can add the most value to your rosters. And I think that's where a lot of times that's where your dynasty season is won and lost, is in those parts of the year, because there's all kinds of new information happening, and you need to assess it quickly before the whole content creation machine catches up and then everyone understands what it is. And if you can be ahead of that and understand the key indicators for how that's going to happen and how to take advantage of it, that's what I want to try to focus on tonight. So what was actually happening with Travis Etienne last year was, well, he missed his entire rookie year because of the Liz Frank injury or whatever it was, a broken foot. And you got this whole offseason where people are they're really they're conservative. You have these Twitter doctors who are making prognostications, very smart people, very experts at their job, don't get me wrong, but they're using 20 to 40% of the necessary information to make judgments. And people just don't want to be wrong, especially this time of year. They have people who they depend on them for content, and they don't want to make mistakes. And I think gauging risk and assessing risk appropriately is an incredibly valuable skill. And a young 22-year-old running back who was very fat, who was very athletic, with first-round draft capital, attached to I wouldn't say generational, but almost a can't miss QB prospect with a new Super Bowl winning coach after a year before where they had a terrible coaching. It just felt like it was too good to miss. And he was going as a low end running back 2 all throughout the offseason until the workout videos came. You saw him running on the field and people were like, oh, maybe he didn't lose his foot when he had, because that's what the talk is. Everyone's concerned. They're like, there's no news. That means no news. That must be a bad thing. Where in reality, you have to take a step back and look at it. It's May or it's February, March. This is a first round draft pick attached to his college quarterback who has pass catching ability, or the Travis Etienne does, and then he has an entire year to recover. And he's going at RB19 prices over at DLF. And what do I have to invest to acquire that? That was a 6th round startup pick. And so in my startups, I was getting him in the 5th, 6th round. And then he was on 75%, like my three of my 4 championship rosters last year. He was on it, and he carried me that way, even after our dip early in the season. And I had all kinds of notes to talk to you guys about, and I just didn't even care about it. I just went off there. But yeah, that's why I think that's the key to like zoom back out and really quick, some actual advice. We do not know as much as we think we know. All this, talk about historical injury rates, and all this doubt about how Etienne was going to be. Again, James Robinson was in the backfield. There was all kinds of uncertainty how that backfield was going to play out. But and then to buy injury concerns early in the offseason. A lot of people have been burned by J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, what have you, but it's still a consistent strategy for the price of entry for how much it actually costs to acquire, which is a low end RB2 to acquire that. And the payoff it finished as the RB6, or is RB6 now in Dynasty. That is an incredibly smart, safe. Yeah, there's some risk there, but the risk is definitely worth the reward. And I think, especially how the RB landscape was last year, ended up paying off.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, your wildcard selection of Travis Etienne last year was one of my favorites. Like, if he'd have still been around when I got to make my pick, pretty sure it would have been him as well. So, massive Etienne fan. I think there was a bit of worry after week 1 when James Robinson smashed, and thinking, this is quite interesting, but quickly turned that around and got into his rhythm in patches. I think there's a lot to like in Etienne, and you are absolutely right. He's a value winner. I think looking at the offenses in that's getting better. He would maybe not seen the full upside with the lower than expected rushing touchdown numbers from last season as well. So there's definitely more scope to get even higher. I guess the thing for me that concerns me a little bit of Etienne is that pass roll usage. I thought it would be a 60-70 reception guy, and actually the target share was sort of like late 20s, 30 range. Reception wise was, again, nothing to write home about. So I just think if they're adding a guy like Calvin Ridley, I can't see the target share going up a lot. There was using situational guys like Jermichael Hasty as well. So there is things to like about it. There's also some pause. I think running back 5 you mentioned at DLF, was it? Running back
RB6, I think, yeah.
RB6. I think he deserves to be there because we've seen a glimpse. He's in a great situation. We know the talent's there. Round 1 running back. I guess the question is, running backs as a whole, their value has gone down a lot. This is a guy that was an RB2 in fantasy points per game, a low-end RB2 in fantasy points per game. He will have to take another jump, I think, for us to really pay that price that he's going at now and seeing that fruit for reward. So he's someone I like, but he's still got to make that step for me to be fully happy with. Sort of, if he was like my RB1 and I was going hero RB, I think that's quite risky, but I do like him.
He's actually a huge sell for me. Like he's a huge value game. People are going to talk about, well, what happens if he actually reaches that pass catching upside that you talked about? And then I alluded to, like, he did have that in college in his profile. I wouldn't say he's like a pure pass catcher, but what happens if then he could really unlock? Well, I'll let everyone else speculate on that. I'll take the value gain that 6. Now he's going the second round of startups in Superflex. I'll take that round 6 to round 2 gain, whatever I can in trade, and maybe invest in an older running back and then get an additional pick on top of that, or a wide receiver. I think That's how you play the dynasty game. When other people catch up, they're all like, oh yeah, ETN is good. Yeah, I really like him. Well, yeah, thank you. I'll take that value gain. Now you can take all the risk of him getting injured or not living up to the expectations or having more running back competition in there. There's all that goes into that, and I'll let them pay for that risk, and I'll just move on and take my value.
I mean, is that like a process thing for, obviously ETN's running back 6, is it a process thing for you that any running back near the top you are trying to pivot down, or is there anybody that you wouldn't want to pivot away from?
Just if they haven't shown me that pass catching upside yet. So if ETN had totally hit all the way to his high range of outcomes, which is 5 to 6 receptions a game, which I think he has that ability. If he had done that, no, I'd be holding on to him, because then he's almost game script independent, like the agnostic. But now, I need that TD, I need that volume. And if there's a lot of ways that can be, especially at this time of the offseason, there's a lot of ways that can get into that. So I want to try to keep acquiring value. Like, I want to keep acquiring value. And why do you want to keep acquiring value? Is that the idea is that I want to take more shots. I want to take another shot like ETN. And if I keep doing that with my whole roster, eventually I'm going to have, a ton of excess value that I can keep playing with. And I'm going to make misses along the way. That's fine. But if overall you keep churning, you keep moving, you keep turning over your roster, you don't want it to go stale. So I think that's something, we hit on ETN. No, yeah, you hit on him. Now let's take that win and then keep moving along.
Yeah, no, I think you see it every year, don't you, with these running backs when they hit that. It's that age-old thing, I guess. When you're at the top, there's only one way to really go, and that's back down. So when you got that peak value at running backs, and knowing the scarcity of the position, everyone seems to crave the running backs, just because if you've got a workhorse running back, he's that league guy. It's something that everybody craves in fantasy, just having that solid running back. But anything can happen. We've seen it time and time again. Like this year, somebody like Najee Harris, who was going really early up there at that RB 4-5 range, and then seeing that dip in value because he didn't hit that kind of level. So I think, yeah, it's something in Dynasty especially. It's something that I think a lot of people need to or do pay attention to when it comes to running backs and looking to take advantage of that value that you're getting during the off season. So yeah, great first selection, Dave. And with that, we'll move on to your second pick.
Goodness, here we go. Yeah, so I got all the jitters, all the adrenaline's out, and I can get back to just reasoned, kind of, thoughtful analysis. And I guess what I want to lead off with, my next pick was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was going as a low-end wide receiver 3 come, May, June, July. He was as a wide receiver 3. There was a lot, especially this time of off season. Content creators, people, dynasty managers, people on Twitter who are really active, who are listening to podcasts. There's narratives that start to develop because there's not a lot of new information, actionable, predictive information. I think that's a key word to use. Predictive is a word that I'm trying to say is something that I really like. I think it's actionable that you can use. A lot of stuff that we're hearing now at this time of year isn't predictive. It's narrative driven. It's descriptive. It's not necessarily going to translate to the next year or the year after that. So what I'm trying to do is really understand, hear these narratives, and then try to figure out where these narratives are, what they're the data points that are driving them. And if those data points, are they actually something that I would base my analysis off of? So the first thing that was driving Amon-Ra St. Brown's thing last year was target competition. DeAndre Swift was hurt. TJ Hawkinson was hurt. I think all the wide receivers were hurt. Jared Goff isn't a great quarterback. They had to throw the ball a lot because they were behind a lot. There was all kinds of things saying why Amon-Ra wasn't succeeding. And then the other piece of that is sometimes dynasty analysts, dynasty managers, content creators, I think a lot of them double count draft capital. Draft capital is very important. It is important, but a lot of times the things that and it's tough to balance. How much do we care about? I struggle with it when I'm trying to make my decision. How much should I actually weigh this? But what draft capital is, it is kind of a approximation for a bunch of other things. Just because you have a number 1 on your player profile or whatever, round 1 draft capital or whatever, doesn't necessarily make you that does not help. That doesn't give you an extra 5 speed booting or rating or whatever. That's not how it works. This isn't Madden. So what it is, what does playing a draft capital? Age-adjusted college production. That has been known to be very indicative of draft capital. So like looking at other things so taking his age-adjusted production from college, he was he really produced well, and he did it with 2 other NFL caliber wide receivers in Michael Pittman and the number 1 overall pick for the Cardinals, who's escaping Drake London, was over at USC. So he didn't necessarily explode off the sheets, but he was very productive. Oh, and then he was a slot wide receiver, which is like a curse word for some people because he's not Calvin Johnson. So that's the narrative that's going around Amon-Ra, is that, he just because there were targets lying around, he literally just had to walk on the field and he could scoop up targets and fantasy points. That's what happened. And to me, that is not how I make my decisions. What I do make my decisions on is he was productive in college all throughout his career in a top 5 program, or in a top 5 or a Power 5 conference. He produced when he was on the field in the NFL. Yeah, it was a slow start, but he finished as a incredible streak down the end, and he was a very productive wide receiver in his rookie year. So I take all that in, and then I look at, the things that I actually care about. He produced. He did it in a pretty reasonable way by gaining target. Like, it wasn't, he hit a lot of touchdowns, but it wasn't fluky. He was gaining targets. He was making plays, making players miss on the field. So a lot of things that I actually care about. And then I look, what's the cost to acquire? He's wide receiver 33 on keep, trade, cut, or DLF. You kidding me? It's because Jameson Williams, but who's not going to play until we're talking about him playing in October this time last year. No, he'll be ready to play by October. Don't you guys worry. If you go look, that's what all the announcers. He'll be ready by October. Don't you worry. He'll be on the field. That was the reason why we weren't going after Amon-Ra. But you look at it now, and he's now the wide receiver 6 on DLF, and I think and keep, trade, cut. So that's a huge value gain. And what that can do is getting that kind of production when on your roster for that price. That is a difference. That is where, in my opinion, is how you win leagues, is when you get that kind of investment and you get that kind of return on the field, because it's not just like his value didn't go up, but he also produced, which was huge. So I could tell you all the stats and how impressive his target share was, and how he scored. He actually didn't score as much TDs as he wanted. He was targeted on the 1 year line how many times or whatever, but just look at, he had the target share, he had the production. This is his second year doing it. And the numbers speak like now he's wide receiver 6 that in all of Dynasty. So
yeah. In terms of dynasty value winners, I think we have to talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown for the reasons you just mentioned. The fact that he was wide receiver 29 on keep, trade, cut, and going up to the wide receiver 7. I'll hold my hands up. I wasn't in on Amon-Ra St. Brown and paying that price for him, but I think the interesting thing was you had the opportunity to buy high. I guess you call it buy high on him at wide receiver 29 because of how cheap people got him in their rookie startups. He was like a late round 2, even 3rd round rookie draft selection. So you feel like the opportunity to buy was still there because people know they were still getting a return on investment for what they paid in those rookie drafts going up to that wide receiver. I think you mentioned 33 on DLF, 29-ish on keep, trade, cut. That feels like a win. So you've got that opportunity still to buy someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's something that I think you can use moving forward. Buying high on players is not necessarily a bad thing. I know it means you pay more than what you might have got a year earlier, but you don't want to miss out on the chance of getting somebody like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then, like you mentioned, what he did this year. I think that the big thing was Jared Goff taking that step forward. I wasn't too sure that he'd be able to do that, but like you mentioned, the defense was, even though they made improvements in the NFL draft, we still the signs were there that this was still going to be an offense that was going to have to throw the ball to stay in games. And Amon-Ra St. Brown being that wide receiver 1, the signs were there that he was going to see the opportunity. And I think long term, looking at Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think that the way that he's used in this Detroit offense is what really attracts me to him. The fact that they're using him in like the screen plays, jet sweeps, just trying to get the ball in his hands. The fact that he's such a playmaker, and whenever I see a player used in that kind of way, that shows me that this team is fully invested. The fact that he was a day 3 pick was in the NFL draft is completely immaterial now. What he has shown in those first 2 years, this is the Amon-Ra St. Brown that we should be judging him on. And yeah, the fact that he is wide receiver 7 and wide receiver 6 on DLF shows what a great asset he is now in Dynasty. So I'm interested to know, would you still be paying that kind of price? And we mentioned that he's gone up from wide receiver 29. He's now an elite asset, I guess you'd call him in Dynasty at the wide receiver position. Are you still happy to pay that price, looking at maybe rookie picks? I think he's going around an early first, so we're talking 101, 102, 103. Is that kind of price you'd be happy to pay for Amon-Ra?
I'm in an auction right now, and I have a feeling like some people are going to value Devonta Smith over him. And he has not been put up to bid on yet, but he's going to be a target of mine because I haven't been able to, like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, they're all going for premium top dollars. I'm like, they're going like to rival QB production. I just can't pay that in the auction. So I think Amon-Ra is a good pivot down because too. And the reason why I actually think you might not even have to pay this price because the Jameson Williams hype train is going to come. We saw some flashes. It's going to be happening. Jared Goff can't support two wide receivers. You know, he did it in St. Louis or in LA. And it wasn't pretty, don't get me wrong. And I'm sure a lot of the coaching had to do with it, but he can do it. It's not like he can't perform to support two wide receivers. And I think Amon-Ra's game is definitely gels a lot better with Jared Goff than Jameson Williams does. But I think you're just going to get the whole thing going on too. People aren't in love with his size. Then they're going to say, "Oh, he kind of gets injured a lot." Like when you're watching the games on Red Zone, and you see him, he comes up a little gimpy, he goes off for 2 or 3 plays, and comes back. There's just some negative energy around him. And the Lions are getting better. They're not going to have to throw the ball as much. They're going to run the ball more with their running backs. All this is going to happen. There is going to be a time where you can still go and get Jameson Williams So excuse me. Ooh, that was a slip. Amon-Ra St. Brown. and I think the Sun God, I'm totally fine with paying or getting him at this price. I'd be taking him over any of I haven't done a lot of rookie research yet, but I'd pretty easily take him. I think I'd take him over any of the rookie wide receivers, I think.
Oh, that's fair. Kev, any final thoughts on Amon-Ra before we move on?
It's an interesting one because obviously he's shown it for a season and a half, really, and you can't really argue that he's not a flash in the pan. He's not Travis Fulham. I think it's interesting because they are going to add something at tight end, maybe a Mike Gesicki type. I think most this season he did without Hockenson. I think it was the same in his rookie season. Towards the end, I think Hockenson was injured or Swift was injured or both. Look, you know my thoughts on Jameson Williams. I think Amon-Ra, he'll be absolutely fine. I think he's someone that any team should be going after, a young wide receiver that's hit. So yeah, I think he'll have a strong market in your leagues.
So my feelings on Jameson Williams, and I still think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a fine option. I think both of those guys, like Dave mentioned, can be great pieces in this offense. But Dave, we'll move on to your final Dynasty value winner. Who have you got?
So we've got Devonta Smith. I just want to ask a couple questions to the audience. And I know that you have no listeners who aren't like this, but I want to know where BMI Twitter is now. Where are the BMI doubters of Devonta Smith? When you want to talk about the way the numbers were being manipulated to show that BMI matters, they do some mumbo jumbo hit rate. And even if it matters, it doesn't matter so much. People were saying they were using it as indicative of, like you just throw, his stats don't matter. He just has a low BMI. Who cares? Who cares? He has a Heisman Trophy winning season. Doesn't matter. And it just really that's what I'm talking about. Trying to be a theme here of the narratives that are around players and what it can do and the advantage that you can take of when you go back and you try to break down where these narratives are coming from. And I have all of the wide receivers dating back to 2000. I have a BMI column in my spreadsheet. I can click on BMI and I think, there's a very slight edge to where like BMI and has a slightly better hit rate over time, but I'm talking like minuscule percentage points. But if you actually look at it in the percentage of actually but then you adjust it for actually how many of those wide receivers that come in with that BMI, it actually shows that it just doesn't matter. So that actually the hit rate's better for lower BMI wide receivers. But that's a side note here. So just going back and breaking down where these narratives are coming from and does it actually matters? You have to, and Devonta Smith, people are really worried. Jalen Hurts wouldn't pass the ball. He was not a good passer, not an accurate passer. Eagles are a low volume offense. So that was another a thing going on. And where we know that we've seen it, JJ Zachariason, Peter Howard, there's tons of people who have done, Dwayne McFarland, they've talked about how these things revert back to a mean over time. Just because you're a low passing volume, you're still going to, it doesn't mean you're automatically going to revert, but these things are ebb and flow. And what happens if another key thing that people never talked about was the Eagles have been consistently trying to acquire wide receivers and they've missed. They missed on Jalen Reagor, but and then the guy who turned into a tight end, gosh, I forget his name. Man, I'm blanking on his name. Arcega Whiteside. Yeah, he's another they were showing us with their actions that they wanted to invest in wide receivers. Well, you don't invest in wide receivers to block. You invest it to throw them to them. And so, and the Eagles are probably the best analytical franchise in the NFL right now. And so you're telling me that the best analytical franchise doesn't want to throw the ball? I think that's that doesn't match to me. So what I did is I went out and acquired a lot of Devonta Smith because he was a low end. There's a theme here. Young players who have performed at a young age based, on that with stats that matter, like target share, yards per route, yards per team pass attempt, all these different things that matter, and they're doing it at a young age. I think they're going to continue to do it. And despite of what the narrative or what the team circumstances are. And he was a wide receiver 3. I got crucified on Twitter when I traded Jerry Jeudy and a 2024 second for straight up for Devonta Smith. I got dragged through the mud. That was stupid. Well, one finishes a wide receiver 1 this year. And I still earned the 101 in that league, but it doesn't matter. But I won that trade, God damn it. But the point is that I think we're so risk averse, and they're in the same tier. Why would you do that when they're in the same tier? No, because I think one player is better, and he has better numbers that I care about, and so I'm going to invest in it. And you look at, people worried about AJ Brown was going to hog all the targets. He was overshadowed by Devonta Smith had 23% target share as a rookie, and finishes like wide receiver 31 his rookie season. This is a pretty freaky. If you look at how good wide receivers, how they progress throughout their career, when you do get that kind of target share and then you finish with that many fantasy points in year 1, you're probably going to improve, especially in year 2. That's the best time that you're going to see a big jump, and at the cost to acquire for a wide receiver 3 type numbers to make that kind of bet over and over. And I will make that bet. I'll miss, and I'm going to talk about a player I missed on making that same bet later on. But it's I'm going to hit big. I'm going to miss small. That's my process. I try to make smart, calculated, risky decisions. Because there's risk everywhere. A player could get arrested and suspended at any moment. A player that Sean Watson, I don't want to bring it up, but he's one of the he was considered immaculate off the field, and so that whatever happened, the whole drama that happened with him going forward happened. There's risk with every single player, and we're just really bad at assessing it. So I'm going to accept that risk and try to make gains off of that, and that's what Devonta Smith was. And I think I had one more thing to say there, but I've rambled on a little bit here, so I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, first of all, go Birds. But yeah, I think Devonta Smith is someone that's really a hot topic at the moment. He's getting a lot of airtime. Rightly so. He's had an amazing season. He's performed outstanding. A lot ties in with the Eagles being sort of focused as well in the community, in the media, etc. But yeah, he's someone that outperformed my expectations as an Eagles fan. I thought he would be the third person in the offense behind sort of Goddard. I thought with these typical low volume offenses with a pretty solid tight end, it's usually the wide receiver 2 that sort of fizzles out, but it's not been like that at all. I think we've made arguments that him and AJ Brown are both Batmans or Batmen as such. So yeah, I think the interesting thing with the Eagles is that they've got the 3 weapons, and that's it. There's nobody like eating anything after that. No Zach Pascal or Quez Watkins, etc. So it's really concentrated. I think it can support all 3. We've seen Ertz do great. We've seen that it's a team that's been playing from the front, so there's potentially more pass volume to come in the future. So he's an interesting guy, isn't he? He's someone that's clearly hit, that's sort of on that cusp of wide receiver 1 range now. I'm sort of coming around onto him, if I'm being honest. I did a show about 6-7 weeks ago, and I was a little bit low, thinking, well, we haven't seen Goddard fully this season, sort of thing. But yeah, I'm coming around. I don't know if I'm at wide receiver 12 range yet for him, but I guess the question I've got for you, Dave, is obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown's value quite a bit higher than him in Dynasty if you're just looking at the numbers. What percentage would you give it that actually Devonta Smith will flip that and become the higher valued Eagles wide receiver in Dynasty?
That's because people are obsessed with size, and AJ Brown's done it for a long time and in different environments too, than just with the Eagles or with different teams. So the percentage of that he'd be the true wide receiver one, I think it'd be probably low, like 30%, 30%. Because I mean, it is in the range of outcomes. I mean, Devonta Smith is really, really freaking good, and his rookie season was overshadowed by the Jamar Chases, Jalen Waddles, or whatever. But if you look at what what successful wide receivers do in year one, Devonta Smith did it. So that's why it made it such a smart bet to do. And look, what happens if you had missed at wide receiver 3 prices and he finishes a wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 3? Oh, okay. Well, I have a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and wide receivers just don't grow on trees. I think that's a misnomer from years ago that, in the beginning of the season, before injuries and before people underperform, it feels like there's so many wide receivers. But then when it comes to difference making season, when you actually want to score fantasy points, there aren't as many wide receivers. So I'm not going to be I want both. I want AJ Brown and Devonta Smith to wrap back to your question.
Two Batman.
I have actually on a championship team, 2 teams. I had both of them. People are like, why? Well, you can't have a team with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. Oh well, I did.
Yeah, and I bet they'll wish they had it as well now. But
just for those prices,
absolutely. So we've done the feel good stories, the dynasty winners. We're now going to look at the dynasty value losers. So Dave, straight back to you. Who is your first value loser?
It was Kyler Murray, and we've been talking about wide receivers a lot here. I know we start off with ETN at running back, but I think the quarterback, especially this time of year, and we're looking at our rosters and how why they didn't do as well as we thought they would, a lot of time has come down to QB play. And Kyler Murray, who was, in redraft, not even in dynasty, people were saying to draft Kyler Murray over Patrick Mahomes in redraft. They thought that was because of his rushing ability and his everything that was happening to the offense for the Chiefs. They thought, oh yeah, invest in Kyler Murray. And I get the thought process here. And because Kyler Murray was a really good player, he was valued as probably QB2, I think 2 years ago. Now it's more like he was like a top 5 dynasty QB. And now he's going as like QB9, QB10 because he blew out his knee against the Patriots. There's already reports going on that he won't be ready for the season. I think historically it takes 9 months for quarterbacks to get back to it. Now rushing quarterbacks, and maybe with Kyle Murray and how he approaches football is more, I think he makes smart business decisions. He might not rush himself back. And people want to criticize Lamar Jackson for doing that. Well, I think it might be actually a smart thing to be doing. I think Kyler Murray would be smart enough to come back. But that being said, he's an incredibly accurate thrower. His completion percentage over expected, his EPA stats, while they weren't as good this year, throughout his career have been very, very good. And those are sticky from year to year. I think Kyler, but I'm supposed to be talking negatively about him. I'm already jumping into the hype train part of it. But I understand why. Cliff Kingsbury was supposed to be that he was like a fake sharp. He was supposed to be really smart, but it ended up showing that his offense wasn't necessarily that great. And Kyler Murray stopped rushing as much. You weren't getting the rushing production. And then with the injury, then people are afraid they won't be back for next year. He's plummeting down dynasty. And I think even if he's still being, I think he's ranked relatively well, but when it actually comes to clicking the draft button, when you have to start you're in a startup or you're making a trade and you're trying to win now, to invest in Kyler Murray, that's a lot of risk. That is tough to pill to swallow for that price, even though it's gone down by at least 2 rounds from what it was last year. So I think, 2 to 9 doesn't sound like that big of a drop, or 5 to 9 doesn't sound big a drop, but when you're at the top and you're ranked so highly and to drop that far, Kyler Murray was supposed to help people win championships this year because of his ability and adding DeAndre Hopkins coming back. But that just didn't happen. I think he was a huge dynasty loser, and I think a lot of teams were losers because of having him on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to bring up Kyler because, like you mentioned, where he was ranked, why it might not be a big difference between QB6 to QB9. I think in terms of tiers, it's maybe gone down 2 tiers. I think he was pushing to get into that elite tier, and now he's kind of fell back a tier from where he was. So while the numbers don't look huge, I think in terms of actual value, it has been quite a bit of a drop for Kyler Murray. And like you mentioned, I think that the fact that he has had such a gruesome injury, the fact that it's going to take time for him to get over this injury, there's a very high percentage chance that his not going to be ready for the start of the year. Could even be half of next season before we see Kyle Murray back on the field. Is a reason why his value continues to sink a little bit. Like we talked about with Travis Etienne, I wouldn't be too surprised to see it start bumping back up when we get these videos on Twitter of him looking good, looking like he's moving again. People then remember that, he has still got both of his legs and he's got that rushing ability. So I can definitely see his value going back up again once it comes back to full health. But I fully agree that he should be a Dynasty value loser and be mentioned on this show. But my question to you, Dave, is obviously we're in the off season. We're going to be getting into startup season. Everyone getting in startups. I know you've mentioned you're already in one. How concerned are you with pushing the button on someone like Kyle Murray, given the fact that you know you're not going to have this elite asset to start the year? We know you're going to have to likely draft him as your QB1. Are you still happy to make that move, or would you rather let somebody else take that potential risk, I guess, of not having a QB1 to start this season?
Well, I have a Kyle Murray in a lot of existing rosters right now. So and I don't try to make a purpose of it. Like when I have a lot and it's like a depreciating asset, I try not to like reinvest in it because I already I'm cool with holding him other places. But I am totally fine with having Kyle Murray on upcoming rosters. I think, but realistically, I'm not expecting him to jump back into a top 5 QB spot just because I think he doesn't want to rush the ball anymore. I think he is aware that he's been ended each of his seasons with an injury or had a significant injury in his seasons, and that rushing has really hurt him because, or at least consciously. I mean, now I'm playing a guessing game. I'm trying to create my own narrative, but I think I'm not expecting him to go into the Patrick Mahomes tier like that. I actually thought he could be in that tier 2 years ago, because of his accuracy, his rushing ability, and his ability to push the ball down the field. I thought so, but I have a hard time seeing his value bounce back up because I didn't get into this when I was talking about it. I have these the narrative around him is it's kind of a depressing narrative. People jump on him for the video game stuff, and I think they're funny at first, but it gets kind of gross, how they're just piling on him for the video game stuff. Well, sorry, he's not, out with strippers. Not there's anything wrong with being out with strippers and partying with them late into the night. I don't you do whatever you want to do, but there's a lot worse vices than playing freaking video games. And people want to they were like, oh, his teammates don't love him, and oh, he's not a leader, and there's a lot of negativity around him. But then I look at the stats, I'm like, I think I'm not going to let that narrative influence me, but I think it's going to hurt his value going forward. So if I'm playing I want to just add value to my roster, I don't think Kyler Murray is necessarily going to do that, but I think eventually he's going to be scoring me points to help me win. So that's not the kind of to just gain value might not be Kyler Murray, at least not right away. I think eventually he might, but he's more of his value just isn't appropriately priced right now, and I'm going to just take that small win, but I don't think there's a huge win coming up for Kyler Murray.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with that, we'll move on to your second selection, Dave. Who have you got?
This one hurts. DeAndre Swift is a pass catching running back with draft capital who's young, and that is how my running back strategy in Dynasty is built off of. He was probably my highest rostered running back for years, and he's had the injury bug. And there is something to be said for there is something that he does on the Lions that they just don't like things that he does. I think the coaching staff disagrees with him. I think Deuce Staley, I think that's the coach. Yeah. They have different philosophies. I think DeAndre Swift won't always take the sure hole, and he'll dance a little bit or bounce it outside. I don't think Staley loves that. And I think I do not see DeAndre, and I think Dynasty agrees too, because he was a top 3. He was the RB3 across the board, across platforms last year. And now he's RB11. And I've been trying to. I've been kind of feeling like I can get the 103 or 104 for DeAndre Swift, or I'll throw something on top of DeAndre Swift to get that 103. I can't do it. Nobody wants DeAndre Swift right now. It's because of his workload. He had something like 30% opportunities of that backfield at one point. He's not getting the goal line work because of Jamal Williams, who's not a free agent now, but people are acting like he's going to be there forever. And the injuries are concerned too. And you've seen that, all that. So not getting the workload, injuries, and being valued so highly and just underperforming. And then all the narrative about the coaching staff might not like him. I think you're seeing that being reflected in the dynasty value despite his age, and because people love pass catching ability, and that still is having him fall. It's too bad because you do see DeAndre Swift still make dynamite plays. It's weird. You make a great play, and he scored. I forget who was playing was, but I was watching the red zone, and he made like 3 people miss and bounced it outside and scored a touchdown. And Deuce Staley was like yelling at him when he got back, like not a positive yell. And I'm like, what is going on? What did he do wrong? He just scored a touchdown. I think that there's something about his fit on the Lions where I think he's going to be an efficient player, and he's going to have boom weeks where he's going to score 2 touchdowns just because that's his talent profile of he can score from anywhere. But I don't think to count him as your RB1 is really tough. And so I think that's why we're seeing such a drastic fall for DeAndre Swift in both trade value and in rankings. And someone who a big fan of him isn't trying to hold on to him and try to someone who usually tries to, zag when everyone says zigging or, whatever that saying is. I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel like DeAndre Swift. I know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, I've got to agree with the value dropping massively. Is going sort of running back 2 or 3, as you mentioned, and he's not put to bed these concerns we've had for years about the workload and the injuries. He's really exciting though. Like, I can't quite do it at his price because you are sort of hoping that he's going to be your hero RB, or you're going RB heavy, which is not a great strategy risk-wise. So his price will have to come down. But if it comes down to sort of the mid-teens, I'm definitely going to be all in back on Swift and hoping that situation changes because he has flashed it. He's elite in fantasy points per touch, an opportunity really. It's just a case of can he find somewhere that's going to actually give him a shot and give him that opportunity to have a workload. And yeah, I just hope he's in a better situation because I seem to love Jamal Williams. They've give players like Justin Jackson a shot, Craig Reynolds as well. So yeah, Swift in Detroit's worrying. Swift elsewhere is something that's more appealing for me in Dynasty. So hypothetical question for you, Dave. DeAndre Swift moves next offseason. If you could drop him in one spot, drop him onto a city in the US, where would it be?
Besides Kansas City, because that's what everyone says. I think everyone talks about the Chiefs drafting Jonathan Taylor, they can fix that, or they trade for Jonathan Taylor, they'll fix their mistake for drafting CH. I was like, well, you could do the same thing with DeAndre Swift. I bet he's cheaper. But I think anywhere with a quarterback who has no problem targeting running backs, now this is off the cuff here. What team? Honestly, anywhere but Detroit. I don't care. You can go anywhere but Detroit. I think that'd be my one. I think, yeah, and that'd be a great buying opportunity because I think people would be like, "Oh, there's something wrong with DeAndre Swift." I don't think everyone would be crazy if he didn't get a plus landing spot. I don't think he'd be a huge target for people. I could be wrong on that one, but man, one spot that I would love. No, I can't think of one spot. Maybe Miami would be fun.
Miami would be fun.
Miami would be a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, no, I think like you mentioned, I think it's one of those cases. And we know the talent of DeAndre Swift. It's just this situation. It's not ideal at the moment. It'd be great if he was to go to another team and maybe use him in the way that would emphasize the great traits that he does out. Those big plays that we see from DeAndre Swift. It'd be great to see him a little bit more often. But yeah, I think in terms of talent, there's no denying he's a top talent in the NFL. It's just not playing out at the moment. But Dave, we're going to move on to the final Dynasty value loser. Who have you got?
I'm looking at the time here. I'm not doing too bad on what I'm supposed to be doing here. I'm only 2 minutes behind schedule here. So yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit more efficient here with Elijah Moore. I think if you want to talk about a player that I probably put my flag on more than anyone last year was Elijah Moore. It was a huge miss, swing and a miss. If you had told me that he'd be yelling at coaches and calling his quarterback out on social media and with the regular media, and then asked to be traded and benched, essentially, I would never have guessed this could happen for Elijah Moore, who was everyone wants to talk about. Jamar Chase was a rookie winning wide receiver and how great Jalen Waddle was. Elijah Moore was going to win people championships the way he was performing before he got injured in his rookie season. He was winning weeks because he was the cost required. He was going in the middle of second rounds of rookie drafts. He was incredible, I think it was the middle of the second round when he in startups or in in rookie drafts when he was a rookie, and way down in redraft, and he was going to win people titles. And because he had the target share, he had the efficiency, he had the raw numbers. He had a lot of touchdowns, which I guess looking back, that could have been a signature. But ultimately, some of that came with, you could like, what could we have figured out beforehand? Well, a lot of that was not with Zach Wilson. And when Zach Wilson came back, they did not blend very well. And, Garrett Wilson he was just earning targets better. He just came in there and earned targets more than Elijah Moore did. And I think also too, some of it was the routes that Elijah Moore was running compared to what Garrett Wilson was being asked, and the way that offense was developed. I think they were trying to feed Garrett Wilson more. But that being said, now Elijah Moore is wide receiver 50 something, wide receiver 40 something now. And after he never got it that high. I think he was still low end wide receiver 3. But I mean, I had him ranked at wide receiver 13 last offseason for my dynasty ranks. He was he's a huge target of mine. And people, I've been talking about my hits. I'll show up and pump myself up here, but really swung and missed Elijah Moore. The thought process was he was a 21-year-old player with good draft capital. He performed at incredible levels from a target share, raw targets perspective, and an overall season perspective. And in year 2, there's a huge jump in targets for those players and in target share. And that just did not happen for Elijah Moore because of or maybe how he was in the locker room and just how that offense evolved. And that it just doesn't happen very often. It doesn't, just because it happens a lot doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. And oops, I guess my wide receiver 3 bet didn't work out. Oh, well, it beats than when you're investing I'd rather miss there than I would be missing with a top 12 wide receiver selection. So I think it's just a smart investment. I'm not going to let what happened to Elijah Moore deter me moving forward. So I think the process, people always, there's actually some shame that goes on about, the process over results. And I think I'm going to own the results here. It's like, it didn't work out, but I'm still going to make that bet moving forward because it worked with Amon-Ra. It worked with Devonta Smith. So I'm going to keep making those bets, especially for those prices. You burn that like 6th round capital in a startup. That's not going to kill you versus doing that in the middle of the 2nd round.
Yeah, I know. While we're beating ourselves up, Dave, I'll join you on this. That I was completely wrong on Elijah Moore as well. It's probably because of you, Dave, to be honest, because I know, like I said, we've had you on plenty of times. You're more than happy to hype up Elijah Moore. Your friend Rondale Moore as well. You can't get enough of these Moores. So yeah, I think I was right there with you. I seem to remember putting on Twitter that I wouldn't be surprised to see Elijah Moore outproduce Garrett Wilson. Given the fact of, like you mentioned, taking that step forward in his sophomore year, the fact that Garrett Wilson was coming in as a rookie, we've been blessed with these wide receivers coming in and producing immediately. But I thought there's every chance that Elijah Moore could be that key part, that slot wide receiver that was going to see plenty of targets and outproduce Garrett Wilson. So yeah, I'm more than happy to hold my hands up and say that I was right there with you in falling. But a little bit like you mentioned, I think that the process was a correct one to take, to be honest. Being in this offense, the fact that the way that he produced it in his rookie season before he got hurt, the signs were all there that there was an opportunity for him to take that jump forward. And like you mentioned, I think he was wide receiver 19 on keep trade cut, and I thought that was still pretty fair value, to be honest, on Elijah Moore. So yeah, I'm with you, Dave. Don't beat yourself too much on this one, because I know I was right there. I think Kev as well was fairly high on Elijah Moore as well. But I'm interested to know, you've mentioned about all the things that went wrong for Elijah Moore, but would you still be interested in targeting someone like Elijah Moore? The fact that he is wide receiver 40 on keep trade cut, we know the quarterback carousel that we had to deal with last year, but he is still the second choice receiving option, I'd say, on this offense. So is there still hope maybe for Elijah Moore, and is he potentially a value where he is right now?
The problem is the coaching staff who put him in the position that he did is still going to be there, regardless of the quarterback. The coaching staff and the scheme. Yeah, I know they got rid of the offensive coordinator, but it's hard to. I was thinking Elijah Moore. I'm talking like I wanted Devonta Smith type production from Elijah Moore. That's what that's the bet that you're making. Now I don't think that ceiling's there anymore. I think you're getting a low end wide receiver 2 type ceiling now, and then maybe with some TD luck and you're like mid wide receiver 2 type numbers. So I think the high end upside isn't there anymore for Elijah Moore. But for prices, I'm okay with having it. Like, I'm not I didn't sell him away very much anywhere, which is probably people say that was a mistake, not trading him away. So I'm fine with having my roster here, but I think just the realistic part is that I think he's going to be like a bye week fill in, probably more than likely. I'm going to play the matchups, but it's just he's not a target per se, even at his price. But I'm not avoiding him either.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I mean, what a sorry way to end that section. But with that, we're going to move on to a more upbeat section. This is where Dave excels himself. We're going to move on to the fantasy wildcard selection. This is where we get our guests to pick their fantasy wildcard. So the player that's going to improve their dynasty value the most in the upcoming season, in the 2023 season. As I say, Dave, there's no pressure. But last season you kind of hit it pretty sweet with Travis Etienne. So who's your selection this year?
Well, the rule of Twitter and content creation, right? You get one win, you can ride that forever. So I can just miss five more times. It doesn't matter. So I'm just going to swing for the fence here and say Sam Howell. I think he's QB 28 on Keep Trade Cut. That's really low in the rankings. Like he's just inside. I think he's the player ranked 150. And so all he basically has to do is get a starting job and by the end, keep that starting job and then start the season. And he's already going to gain value. That's like how that's so I'm actually it's more of like game theory type play, whereas he's just valued so low that I think I could get an incredible value and just win. I want to be 1 this year. I was 7th last year with ETN. I want to be 1. And the reason behind that is not just because I think he's just to get the job though. It's that I think that if I haven't done a ton on this class, but if I could just knowing what I do know about these players so far, I think I would have Sam Howell as my QB3 in this class. I'd take him over Levis. Howell's he's more accurate. He's is more efficient thrower, and he can run the ball very well. I mean, he's not like a dynamic runner, but he showed in his one start that he could definitely give you 2 to 3 fantasy points per game on the ground. And that floor, the rushing, people want to talk about ceiling all the time. It's not just about ceilings when it comes to rushing quarterbacks. It's such a nice floor to have that each week, getting almost 3/4 of a touchdown each week from just rushing, and what that can do to you as far as not having terrible fallout losses. So I think while it is a risky bet here because of just the draft capital that went into him, and that we have a long offseason where there's going to be a lot of rotating quarterbacks throughout this offseason that could land in Washington, I just think Sam Howell is a good enough player to be playing the NFL as a starting quarterback. And the way his fantasy profile is of being able to throw the ball, make solid decisions, and run the ball, he's a dynamite to gain value and a ton of value where he's ranked right now.
I mean, I admire this selection, Dave. It's fantastic. I think you're either going to be right at the top of the list next season, or you're going to be right at the bottom. So
you might not be in the NFL next year. No, I'm just kidding. It's wild card. You got to get wild.
Gosh, you do. You've got to do that, and I think that there will be a spotlight on you whichever way it goes. But I think it's really interesting because there'll be a lot of people this time of off season where they won't even realise the news that the Commanders have come out and said that Howell's going to be the starting QB. They're interviewing for the OC, and they're telling all the OCs that this is the plan. So you might be able to actually catch someone off guard, someone that's maybe not keeping up with the news, send them an offer for Howell and sneak him without them actually even knowing that he's in line to be the starter. That's an idea. Prospect-wise, I think for me, it's day free capital. Round free capital. Or was it day free capital?
I think it was 5th round.
5th round, so yeah, day free capital. That puts me off. I think if I've got him and there is a bit of buzz, I do want to move off just based on the track record of day free QBs, etc. But yeah, there is also going to be the potential that you can sneak him off someone now, and then you can sell him before the season if he's obviously the starter. So that's an easy way to win some money. And speaking of money, I just need to know how much money Matt's give you to make that selection.
No, you can't bribe me. Sorry.
Yeah, we were having a little joke with him before we started recording. Dave, I absolutely love this selection. I mentioned I've been waiting to finally talk about Sam Howell. I had him as my QB2 pre-draft last year as a prospect. Obviously, the fact that he fell to day 3 kind of hit the hype that I had with him. But Yeah, it's been a real rough season for Sam Howell. The fact that Carson Wentz, I think there was hope that if Carson Wentz struggled, then we could potentially see Sam Howell quite early. But why did that happen? Why do we see Tyler Heineke after play so many games? I mean, I know Washington clearly loved him. The fans absolutely loved him. But why do they not want to see what they had in the quarterback that's selected? Well, they didn't put a huge investment in him. I mean, you've got to see what you've got. I mean, it's got to be worth taking a chance. There was basically not much to play for with Washington. So I don't get why they didn't turn to Sam Howell earlier, but it's great that they've come out and mentioned that he is potentially going to be the starting quarterback for them next year. I think that's a huge plus. And just on the fact that you've selected him as your wildcard selection, I absolutely commend the selection. The fact that the guy that won it last year, Lewis Woods, he selected Jalen Hurts as his pick. Well, I'm not ever going to suggest that this is any kind of way similar in terms of the ceiling for Sam Howell.
I see it. I'm not. I see it. I'm not just saying that. There is. I see it. I didn't even think of it, but I love it.
But it just being a quarterback, and obviously we're basing it on Superflex, the value that these quarterbacks can gain. If Sam Howell comes out and puts up a really solid season, we could be talking a low-end QB1, and that's going to be an absolute massive bump in value in terms of his ranking on Keep Trade Cut. So yeah, I think it's a great selection. It's how we should approach these wildcard selections. It's what us guests to do. So yeah, I commend you for the selection, Dave. And while Kev mentioned you could crash and burn, I'm fully backing you, Dave, for this being your number one selection without doubt.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same page. That gives me a little more confidence here. And I don't think actually the move, like Kev kind of mentioned, try to slip one in. People might not be up with the news. I think people, if they're smart, they probably have heard it, or they might have forgotten it. Yes, but I think the way to do it is to like take a George Pickens and trade for a Christian Kirk and a Sam Howell. Like bump down from Pickens to Howell and Kirk. And I think that's the type of move you want to make where it's like, oh man, I actually I probably would take Christian Kirk straight up over George Pickens in ranks, which why I'd have to do it. Well, you know what? I'm going to give me Sam Howell to make up for the difference in value for a trade wise. And I think that's the type of move to do. Whereas it's not like a tiny piece you're trying to do, but it just gives you one extra bullet in the chamber to fire, where it's just an extra dart to throw towards the target to try to gain your value on your squad.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like how I mentioned with Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. I think the fact that the people that have Sam Howell that might have picked him up in the rookie drafts got him so cheap last year. He was going, I think it was like mid-third, even in Superflex rookie drafts, that the fact that now they're just taught that it could be the starting quarterback, that's going to see a bump in value. If you can still get him at QB 28, that's still pretty fair value, I think, and they'll feel good about it. You'll feel good about it. That's how trades work in Dynasty. So yeah, I definitely think he's someone you can still acquire, and like you mentioned, could even just get him as a throw-in on a completely separate deal. Get him thrown in. So yeah, love the selection and love the process on getting him. And with that brings us to the end of the show. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on, Dave, discussing the Dynasty value winners and losers from 2022. But before we let you go, please do let the audience know where they can find you and anything you want to plug or that you might be working on at the moment.
So I'm not having a ton of work right now. My college prospect database is going to be updated pretty soon, the next couple of weeks. But over my Patreon at FF_Spaceman on the Patreon, the majority of my content is free, but if you pay $2, there's a lot of extra added value with an NFL database with a ton of advanced metrics, a college prospect database with a ton of advanced metrics, and but just I like to put out stats there that's all in one place for people. I aggregate it from a bunch of different sources, and then I also write it for DLF. I'll probably write some prospect articles for them soon, but my main goal is I'm trying to finish up my podcast studio that I'm building, so I can start creating my own video content again. That's the goal, but I do want to take a moment and just say how much I appreciate Fantasy Wildcard. Everyone, Kev, Ali, Matt, you guys are awesome. I really look forward to this. And I'm not just saying this. This is one of my favorite shows to be on. I really like the mentality that what you guys do things for charity. I think you guys approach, and I really like the way you guys approach Dynasty and fantasy football altogether. And something about the European, there's this core between, Rich Dynasty Island, Tom, I forget his handle though, but Tom, you guys, some of the 5-yard rush people. There's just a group of you guys that are just really genuine. I enjoy talking to you, so it's an honor to be back on. And thanks for taking time. And I can't wait till we talk again next time.
No, absolutely. Like I said, it's always a pleasure having you on, Dave, and it's always the name that we always have to say that we're getting Dave on every year. It has to be done. We always get you on the streamathon as well. What you do for charity as well, we've got to commend it. It was great coming on the Scottfish Podathon as well. So. Yeah, it's always great, everyone, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and joining us. It's been great, and I'm sure that the audience have loved it. But with that, thank you everyone for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube at Fantasy Wildcard. Join us Tuesday for the podcast and stream. Thank you once again. Have a good one.